In this video, I'm going to go over the ADA Title II update and its requirements specifically for documents. Welcome to the Accessibility Guide channel. My name is Sean Jordison, and let's jump into the ring. I thought that I should specifically call out its impact on PDFs. So the new Department of Justice Web Accessibility Rule and the impact on PDF documents. So in 2024, the US Department of Justice issued a final rule under ADA Title II for state and local governments that sets specific requirements for web accessibility content. This rule explicitly covers PDF documents on public entity websites and mobile apps, and in plain terms, any PDF files posted by a state or local government must be accessible to people with disabilities, and they have to meet certain technical standards unless a limited exception applies. And below, we're going to talk about a summary of what the rule requires for PDFs, the exceptions for older and archived PDFs, and when those rules take effect. So here's what the DOJ rule requires for PDFs. All new and current PDFs on state or local government websites or apps generally must be accessible. The rule adopts the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines by standard, and in practice, this means PDFs should be tagged and structured so that they can be used by screen readers and other assistive technologies. Just like web pages, according to the DOJ, documents like PDF files, Word documents, spreadsheets, etc. are considered web content, and they must meet WCAG 2.1 AA standards. And my friend Chris over at accessible.org, he said, if you publish a PDF, for example, a report, form, brochure, or plan on your website after the compliance deadline, it needs to be accessible to comply with the rule. Now, here is the technical standard. The accessibility standard is WCAG 2.1 AA, which is a set of guidelines for making content accessible, covering text alternatives for images, proper structure, color contrast, and keyboard navigation. PDF documents would need to satisfy those criteria, for example, having proper tags, reading order, text descriptions for graphics, either by being created accessibly from the start or by providing an alternate accessible version. The scope applies to all PDF and other documents that the public entity itself posts on its website or mobile app for public use. Content posted by others, which we will discuss under exceptions, are handled differently. The bottom line, by the effective date, any PDF you continue to post or use on your site for public must be accessible. If a PDF cannot be made accessible, the content should be offered in an accessible format, for example, an HTML page or an accessible Word document. Next, let's talk about exceptions for archived or legacy PDFs. The Department of Justice rule recognizes that state and local government websites often have a backlog of older PDFs and documents. It would be burdensome to fix every old file, so the rule carves out some exceptions for certain PDFs. However, those exceptions are narrow and specific. If a PDF doesn't meet the criteria for an exception, it must be accessible. The key exceptions relevant to PDFs are as follows. Archived PDFs. Historic or outdated content. If a PDF is part of an archived web content, it is exempt from the accessibility requirement. To count as archived content, it must meet all four conditions set forth by the ada.gov website. And here are those four criteria. The content was originally created before the compliance date, so April of 2026. It is only kept for reference, research, or record keeping. Basically, it's not current or actively used information. It's stored in a segregated archive section of the website, clearly labeled for old content, and it has not been updated since being archived. In short, truly archived PDFs or all old documents that are just stored for historical record and left untouched in an archive section do not need to be made WCAG compliant. For example, a PDF report from 1998 stored on the site in an archive section with no updates would qualify as archived content. On the other hand, if any of those criteria are missing, the PDF isn't exempt as archived. An example of a PDF containing a current map of a county park using data collected after the compliance date would not fall under this archive exception just because it's placed in an archive section. since it contains current information. It is not purely for historic reference. That PDF would still have to meet the WCAG 2.1 AA standards. All right, here's the next exception. We have pre-existing legacy PDFs, older files on the site. This rule also provides an exception for pre-existing conventional electronic documents. This covers common documents like PDF, Word, PowerPoint, and Excel that are already available on your website before the compliance date. In simpler terms, PDFs posted on your site before the rule's compliance deadline are generally exempt from the requirement to meet WCAG 2.1 AA. This means you are not required to go back and retrofit every old PDF for accessibility. However, there are important conditions. If that older PDF is still actively used by the public to apply for or participate in services, or if you update the PDF after the compliance date, then the exception no longer applies. In other words, you can leave purely historical PDFs alone, but if a PDF is effectively live content like an application form, people still need to download and submit it, or a document you revise later, it needs to be accessible. An example of an exempt legacy PDF would be a PDF flyer for a town event from 2018 that is just kept on the site for record purposes. This would fall under legacy document exception. It was posted long before the rule and is not something people need for any current service. You wouldn't have to remediate an old flyer to meet WCAG standards. Example of a non-exempt older PDF, a business license application PDF posted in 2020 before the rule that people are still required to use after the compliance date does not get a free pass. Because it's a form actively used for a service, the exception doesn't apply. The PDF would need to be made accessible or replaced with an accessible version. All right, next up we have the third exception, individualized PDF and secure accounts. If your government provides PDFs that are personal to a specific individual and delivered in a secure, password protected way, those PDFs do not have to meet WCAG standards. The exception is meant for things like utility bills, property tax statements, or other account-specific documents. The rule says that to qualify, the document must be in conventional format, PDF or Word, or others, about a specific person, property, or account, password protected and secured. For example, a PDF copy of a resident's water bill available in their online account would likely fall under this exception. The city wouldn't have to ensure every such bill PDF is fully accessible to screen readers. However, if the city posts a PDF in a secure area that is not specific to one person, for example, a PDF notice about a rate increase sent to all customers behind a login, that wouldn't qualify for the exception and would need to be made accessible. And the final exception is the rule includes a couple of other exceptions not directly related to the PDFs. Content posted by unrelated third parties, member of the public posting on a website, and old social media posts by the government are exempt from WCAG requirements. These typically don't involve PDFs that you have posted, so they're less relevant to your PDF decision tree. If you want to check out the PDF decision tree, I have a video that has a blog post with that decision tree in there so that you can determine whether or not you need to keep your PDFs. Even when a PDF is exempt under these rules, you still have ADA obligations if someone needs access to it. The DOJ emphasizes that exception doesn't mean you can ignore accessibility requests. Under Title II's general requirements, you must provide effective communication to individuals with disabilities upon request. In practice, this means that if a person with a disability asks for an accessible version of an archived or otherwise exempt PDF, you should provide the information in an alternate format for that user. A key point is the rule doesn't force you to proactively fix certain older PDFs, but if someone needs that content, you still have to accommodate them. When do the PDF requirements take effect? Well, the final rule was published on April 24, 2024, but state and local governments have a grace period to comply. The deadline depends on the size of the public entity. Large entities, populations of 50,000 or more, compliance is required by 2026 in April. By that date, the website PDFs and other web content should be meeting the accessibility standards or fall under an exception. A practical implication is starting from the compliance date forward, any new PDFs you post must be accessible from the get-go. And you should have addressed accessibility for actively used PDFs that existed before that date. The rule is effectively not retroactive for purely old unused content, but is forward-looking. And after April 2026, all newly added PDFs or modified older PDFs should be made compliant. And yes, the ADA Title II rule does apply to PDF documents. The DOJ's rule and guidance makes numerous specific references to PDFs that clarify PDFs are in fact included in these requirements. PDFs included as electronic documents. The rule defines conventional electronic documents to include PDF files along with Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and similar formats. These are all subject to accessibility requirements, just as website pages are. The Title II update is very specific to these requirements for websites and PDF documents. The Accessibility Guy is now offering web accessibility services, in addition to our self-paced courses and accessible document services. If you want to find out how I can help you get accessible, take a look at the link in the description of this video. And as always, I can be your champion for inclusion. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you next time. Oh, and don't forget that you can check out the Accessibility Guy's PDF decision tree from the link of this video. See you next time.